There are some crazy rumors about church. And one of those rumors is the church just wants your money. We're going to talk about 3 of those in the next few weeks. We're going to talk about the church just wants your money, the church just wants to get big, and the church is just a big show. So I hope you'll come, bring your friends, and we're going to talk about those rumors and how they're just not true. It's interesting, the rumors about churches and church people. There's always rumors about Clear Creek and what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, and most of them are well, actually rarely are they ever based in any fact whatsoever, because that's the way rumors work. But this morning we want to talk about this rumor. It's kind of interesting. Money is one of the touchiest subjects that you can talk about in the church, and I always get really nervous when I'm going to talk about money. I don't talk about it a lot, but I probably don't talk about it as much as I should. I can remember years ago, there was a friend of mine, and his name was John, and John really was not part of any church whatsoever. And so he came to me, he knew I was a preacher, and he didn't know anything about the church I preached at, and he basically said this, he asked, "What do y'all do with all that money?" Now, he didn't realize I was preaching at a church of about 32 people, and we didn't have all that money. And I thought, well, how do I answer this? I can't be serious, because what he was really asking was this: how much that you get to keep? And so I told him, I said, "John, here's kind of the way we do it. We have a collection every week. We put it in one large collection plate. I take it in the back room, we pray over it, and then I throw it up in the air." And I just stopped. And he's just on the edge of his chair. Well, what happens next? Well, whatever God catches is his, the rest of it's mine. And he believed me. You got to be careful what you say, because the rumors will fly. It is one of the touchiest subjects that you can talk about, and I can't deny that we talk about money, that money is part of the kingdom. There's a reason for that, and we're going to talk about this morning. But stewardship, giving, all that are important parts of our Christian life. I'm also unashamed to say that if you go through Starting Point here, one of the things that we talk about, and we're not ashamed of this, is that one of the expectations that we have of every member of this church, whether you're doing it or not, hopefully you're going to create a plan for this, is that you be someone that gives to the church and is invested in the church. And so the question's this: why is this an expectation? Why would we talk about this? Why? This is the second time this year. There may even be another time this year. In my sermon plan, we talk about this subject. Why do we talk about money? Why do we talk about giving? And so I want to take a couple of things and just kind of share them with you this morning. The first thing is this: that giving centers our life around what's important. In Luke chapter 12, in verse 34, it says, "For where your treasure is, your heart will also be." And that's real. That's true. Wherever you place your money, if you want to know what's important to you, take out your checkbook, if you still use one of those things, or your bank statement, and look at where you spend your money. And wherever you spend your money, you're going to realize that that's what's really important. Every year, Super Bowl Sunday, this is just kind of an interesting thing. Super Bowl Sunday, we have a wear your jersey, your team colors to church day. And people come in all kinds of jerseys, team colors, whatever. And I remember I was talking to somebody, and I said, I didn't know you, I think it was Georgia, I didn't know you were a Georgia fan. To which she responded, "I'm not. I had to borrow the jersey. I just wanted to wear a jersey to church." Now, that's a fair weather fan. See, I'm a sold-out fan. I have 2 Titans jerseys. I have a Titans workout jersey. I have a Titans sweatshirt. I have Titans sweatpants that don't fit, never did, but I keep them. I have 9 Tennessee Titans hats. Why? Because I'm a Titan. When the Titans win, you'll never hear me say they won. You'll hear me say we won. I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but we won. You know, being a Titans fan's tough. It's kind of like being a Christian. You know, not everybody's on board with it. You know, you hear things like, how many Tennessee Titans does it take to change a flat tire? Only one, unless it's a blowout, then they all show up. Or, what do the Tennessee Titans wide receivers and Chick-fil-A have in common? Neither one's ever open on Sunday. You'll get that one on the way home. But you know what? I put my money where my heart is. I like the Titans, and that's what, and you know, when it comes to church, I put my money where my heart is. When it comes to God, we put our money where our heart is. Why? Because you cannot separate your heart from your finances. If you think about it and you're honest about it, that is absolutely true. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells an interesting story. In verses 16 through 20, it said, he told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, soul, do you say that to your soul very often? Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? Can you imagine God calling you a fool? Those are strong words. Those are fighting words where I come from. You fool, this very night you're going to start eternity. What have you done for eternity? See, the reality is with most people, we're incredibly short-sighted. And when it comes to what's important, usually it's only the things that are right in front of us that we can even see. Yet the reality is this, that God blesses us not just to have what we need, because most of us really have more than we need. God blesses us so that we can be a river that takes those blessings and passes those blessings on down the stream. That we do something with what God gives us that will have a consequence that is actually eternal. In verse 21, he goes on to say this, so is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. He called him a fool because he's saying, all you care about is yourself. All you care about is storing up more and more stuff so you can eat, drink, and be merry. What about others? What's important? Well, what's important is our eternal life. What's important is making an eternal difference in the lives of other people. You know, I was thinking this week when I was putting the final parts of this lesson together. Usually these lessons, I'm collecting stuff for weeks and weeks and weeks and months before I try to condense it down. And I was thinking, you know, why do I want to talk about this? And I finally came to this conclusion. I want to share it with you. We're told in the Great Commission that we're to make disciples of men. And that's something that you're going to hear a lot more here. We're not going to force you to do anything, but if you want to become a disciple of Jesus, we're going to set up an atmosphere where that can happen. We're to make disciples, and we're to baptize people. We're seeing that happen. And then it says to teach them all that I've commanded you. Well, if I'm going to be someone that teaches all that Jesus commanded, and Jesus talked about money more than he talked about any other subject. I'm going to repeat that. Jesus talked about money more than he did any other subject. Then I have to talk about blessings of money, how to use it in eternal ways. Stewardship, giving, those are all things that are important. Why? Well, because money is the chief competitor for our hearts. That if our hearts are where our treasure is, and our treasure is where our hearts are, then guess what? If we love money, it is a competitor for our love for God. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21, Jesus said, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where the thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. See, giving sinners our life around what's important. What's important is living a life that is on mission. Recognizing that we have been placed here for a purpose, and that the purpose we've been placed here for is to share Jesus with all the people who are around us and to do something with our life that matters. You know, I was talking about our students. We got students down here. They're all over the place. Y'all aren't the only ones. But you know, live a life that matters. Live a life to where someone sees that life and they're going to want to replicate it with their own. And you know what? How we give, what we do with our finances says volumes about what's important to us. It says volumes about living our life on mission. And I want to commend this church. You know, a lot of churches have seen downturns in their giving. We haven't seen that. We haven't experienced that a great deal at this church. Even through the recession of 2009, this church has been very faithful. But I want to encourage you to continue to be faithful. The one thing I learned in economics when I was in college is that the economy is cyclic. There'll be up times, there'll be down times, there'll be market adjustments, there'll be all kinds of things, but the truth is God is always faithful, and He'll be faithful in your finances as well. What's important? Live your life on mission. And then the second thing I want you to see is that, there are two possible questions that will be asked at judgment. You know, I've often wondered what judgment's going to be like, and it's like, maybe He won't ask these questions, but He's going to know the answer to these questions. The first one is, what did you do with my one and only Son? Who did you profess Jesus to be, and how you lived your life, the way you handled your finances, the way you handled your relationships, the way you handled your work life? What did you do with my one and only Son? And the second one is, what did you do with your one and only life? Can you imagine standing before God and answering that question? What did you do with your life? What did you do with your life that really mattered? And I would hate to stand in front of God and say, well, I had a really cool truck, 6-inch lift kit, motor tires. That's what I did with my life. Do you know that that's burning up? Do you know that that's on fire right now because the world is ending and you're here? Do you know that that doesn't even matter? If that's what you've done with your life, God calls you a fool. Second thing is giving sinners our life around who's important. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. And you go on down, it says, you cannot serve God in wealth. Actually, he uses the word God in mammon. If you haven't been here before and heard me talk about giving, mammon is the appropriate translation there, because mammon is actually a person. It's not a what, it's a who. Mammon was one of the 13 gatekeepers that the pagans believed kept the gates of hell. That he was one of the 13 gatekeepers of hell, and that he was the one who came as an angel of Satan and tempted people and drew them away from God using wealth. And Jesus is standing before these Jews, and he's saying, you can't be pagan in how you live your financial life. You can't serve God and serve this gatekeeper to hell and be tempted and drawn away from God because of your wealth. You know, on Wednesday nights, we're doing this series about the parable of the prodigal son. And you know, we usually talk about the parable of the prodigal son, and you look at that parable and you know that this boy leaves home. And his father divides his wealth up with him, money, right? And he goes and he blows all of his money, right? He comes back home and they throw a big party, and the older brother is upset. And what's the other brother upset about? He's not upset that his brother left home. He's not even upset that his brother came home. He's upset that he didn't have stuff. But there are two other parables that lead into this parable that are really just as important. We just don't talk about them as much. The first one's a parable of the lost sheep. We have a man who has 100 sheep, and he loses one, so he leaves the 99, and he goes after that one sheep. And so at the end of the parable, which is just this made-up story that he's using to illustrate a point, Jesus says these words, And when he comes home, he calls together his friends because he's found the sheep. And his neighbors, he says to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. And then look what it says next. I tell you, in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. What's important in that story? Is it money? Is it the sheep? Is the sheep the point of the story? No, for Jesus, the point of the story is that one person who needs to know God. It's that one person that needs to be returned to his Father. It's that relationship that needs to be rejoined. Well, see, that wasn't enough, so he decided he'd tell another story. There was this widow, and she had this money she leaves as a coin. And she turns her house upside down. She's looking for this coin, and finally she finds it. And when she's found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors and says, rejoice with me. I have found the coin which I had lost. And then Jesus goes on to say, in the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. I'm going to make you a little uncomfortable. These statements were not for most of the audience who was listening. Because if you read Luke 15, you'll know that there's two types of people in the audience. Over on one side, there's a group of people who are sinners, tax collectors, which is supposed to be worse than the sinner. Sorry, George. And they got that group. On the other side is the Pharisees, these religious people. And you know what he's saying? He's saying this. He's saying, religious people, if you lost an animal, you'd turn the countryside upside down looking for it. If you lost money, you love money so much you'd turn your house upside down looking for that lost coin. But when you lose people, you just don't care. Isn't that heartbreaking? You know, my preaching has changed over the last several years. And there's a reason for that. This past June, I just turned 54 years old. If I'd known I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself. 54. And I'm starting to realize this. I have a shelf life. I am not a Twinkie. I know you. I see some of you are tweeting that right now. Our preacher is not a Twinkie. News at 11. I am not a Twinkie. I have a shelf life. I only got one life. And I'm starting to realize it's more than half over. And I want to do something that matters. Aren't you the same way? Didn't you realize that the hymnal is right, that time is filled with swift transition, and if we don't do something about it now, if we don't do something about living life on mission because we only do one thing, right? We find people that don't know Jesus, we bring them to a life-changing relationship with Jesus, right? And if we don't do something about that now, we may stand at the end of our life looking back saying, shoulda, woulda, coulda. You know, in one of the great stories about Jesus, the story of the woman by the well in John chapter 4. You're familiar with the story probably. If you haven't read the story, go read it, John 4 today. It's about this woman who comes in the middle of the day to draw water. And she comes out and she's drawing water. Jesus goes to talk to her. But what I want to talk about is what happens afterwards. While Jesus goes and talks to this woman, he's not even supposed to talk to her. His disciples go into town to get food. And I don't know if there was a Taco Bell open. That's where I would have went. But they go into town. They're going to get food, and they're going to come back and bring it to Jesus. So they come back, and Jesus is there alone. And we read this in John 4:31 through 33. It says, meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said, I have food to eat that you do not know about. So the disciples were saying to one another, no one brought him anything to eat, did he? I mean, looking around the ground, they're looking for what was left over, scraps. They're looking for anything. And Jesus saying, well, I'm not hungry. But didn't you send us into town to get food? Yeah, I did. But you don't realize that what just happened here has filled me up. Have you ever been a part of bringing someone to Christ? Have you? Have you ever been a part of seeing what happened with Stephanie this week? You know, being buried in Christ and raised to walk in a new life, knowing that that old life was over and that she was made new. Have you ever been a part of that? Because I can tell you, it is habit forming. I'll tell you that it's addictive. Once you've been a part of someone's life that has changed, and you see that reunion with the Father, you'll be hungry for more. And Jesus saying, oh man, I've just talked to someone and I've shared the secret of the ages with them and I am full. He goes on to say this. And Jesus said to him, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. And what is that will? To find people that don't know him and to bring them to a life-changing relationship with him, to create this family reunion between God and his kids. Do you say, there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look to the fields, that they are white for harvest. You know, I get really, really motivated by Vision 2020. If you're new here, you may have heard us talk about it, but you may not know what that means. Vision 2020 is something we're trying to do here, that by the year 2020, we'll have just as many people who either have never had a church family or have had a church family and left because, you know, church people and churches can sometimes not be what they're supposed to be. And we want them to come home. We want to bring them in this relationship with Jesus. And I'm excited about that, but I want to tell you something. I'm going to warn you. Year 2020 is just 4 years away. And I can promise you, in 2021, we're going to have the same vision. We may have to call it 2030 and claim we're farsighted or something, but we're going to have another vision. Why? Because the fields are white for harvest. We live in the United States of America, the 3rd largest mission field in the world. Isn't that amazing? With all the churches and all the people, this is the 3rd largest mission field in the world. That's why we push. That's why we're constantly doing things that push us outside of our comfort zone. That's why we talk about things like Lake Church. That's why we talk about opening a new on-ramp so that people can connect with the church. That's why we're having discussions about things like satellite churches and video church and how to do small groups better and how to create more discipleship. And I can tell you that we're going to keep pushing. But I can also tell you this, as a preacher, and anybody on our staff can tell you this, as a minister, not pushing so much easier. There are days that I wish I could go back to the old days where there were very few expectations except to just show up and talk. But I'm not a Twinkie. And if I'm going to do something with my life that matters, we have to keep pushing. What's important? Living life on mission. Who's important? Well, you know, we're told that we're to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. So what's important? Our dad and his kids. We have to live our lives in this perpetual exercise of creating family reunion and rejoining that relationship between the Father and his children. And lastly, I want to talk about some facts about giving. These are kind of some important facts about giving. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. The first thing I want you to know is that most dying, stagnant churches have large bank accounts. I get this from a website. Tom Rainier is a church growth expert. What he found is that in 2014, over 3,700 churches closed their doors for the very last time. And only 5% of those churches were financially insolvent. Most of them had large bank accounts. The problem they had was they ran out of people. 98% of their spending was inward. They were collecting money to spend it on themselves. They had forgotten about the Great Commission. And we go on, we find out that the average church is financed by only 20% of people who tend. 20%. I don't know who gives. I don't know how much you give. Don't want to know? That's not my thing. People here will tell you that when I leave here on Sunday, I know how many people were here if I can find out whatsoever, because that's what I care about is people. How many people can we impact? How many people can we influence? But you know what? The money that's collected here, you know what we do with it? Now, we pay some bills, but there are marriages in this congregation that have been saved by the counseling that's been offered and the help that's been given. There are people who still live in their homes and still have lights and they still have gas to heat their homes because you give. There are people in this community who are indigent that receive help, tens of thousands of dollars worth of help, because you give. There's mission trips. There are people who owe their eternal salvation to someone who came from this place and told them about the story of Jesus Christ. There are conversions, there's teaching. And you want more of that? Buy a team jersey. Claim ownership to what's going on here. Allow your treasure to declare where your heart is. The third one I think is kind of interesting is that the leading reason most people do not give is that they do not have a plan for giving. You know, we explained tithing away years ago. Tithing is a biblical concept. Give 10% of your income. It's something that's been taught for years, and we explained that away, saying, well, you give as you're prospered. Well, okay, that's fine. But most of us are prospered more than nothing. And the reality is that most people give nothing to the church. And if you don't have a plan to give, I want to challenge you with something. How much money do you spend on lunch during the week or at Starbucks during the week? What are your bills? Sit down and look at your bank statement and look at what you pay for certain things and see if you can't move God up the scale a little bit. Maybe start off by spending more on Him than you do Starbucks or more on Him than you do lunch. Until you get to the point where you can say, look at my finances. I honor God. He's my top priority. Seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things are added to you. So what about this myth? What about this rumor? The church just wants your money. Well, it's just not true. The church wants our hearts to be attuned toward God, which includes honoring God with our treasure. It's not about money. It's about declaring to the world that there are things that are more important to us than money. It's about saying, you know what? Here's where my treasure is. Read my heart. You know, there's something about sharing good news that's lots of fun. You know, I was talking to a guy not long ago. He found out that he had sleep apnea, and I have sleep apnea. I sleep with one of those little breathing masks on, you know, and it's kind of interesting. We had this conversation. You see bikers go down the road, and they have this little wave. You know, they do the wave. That's how you identify bikers. And I don't know what the sleep apnea wave is. Maybe that's it. But when I started telling him, man, you're going to feel so much better. You're going to sleep like you've never slept before. I had so much fun telling him because it brought him hope. When's the last time you told someone about Jesus? When's the last time you told someone, here's his story, here's my story, here's how they intersect? And it's brought me such hope. It's poured comfort and encouragement into my life. Because when you do that, you're filled with such joy. What happens is it compels us. All these baptisms, all these mission trips, all the good that's being done by this church and you in this church, it's our dividend check for the investment that we have in the kingdom of God. It's how God works amongst us. But we have to be invested. We have to be people who give. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15 say, for the love of Christ compels us. When we love Jesus more than we love other things, it compels us to do amazing things. It said, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died, and He died for all. Why? So that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for Him who died and rose again on their behalf. We have no benefactors that finance this church. Everything that we do is financed by the people you're looking at in this room. There are no special campaigns. There are no headquarters that funnel us money. None of that happens. It all happens because people reach into their pockets and they give their means. I want to encourage you to allow the love of Christ to compel you to give your heart to Him while you give your treasure.